On today's show, we look at a Calder Trophy head-to-head, Connor Bedard versus Logan Cooley. We'll also have some questions from our listeners, and we'll look at some young NHLer bounce-back candidates, including Juraj Slafkovsky, Anton Lundell, and much more. All coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. During the summertime, though, it'll be 3 times a week. My name is Hadi Kalakesh. I'm joined by Sebastian and Hadi, and we're here to bring you another episode of Locked On NHL Prospects. And on today's show, we're going to be starting things off with a head-to-head between Connor Bedard and Logan Cooley for the Calder Trophy. We'll be making arguments for each of them, seeing which one of the two we think is more likely to win the trophy, and kind of seeing how they compare heading into their rookie seasons. And then we're going to look at some listener questions in our second segment. We'll look at some interesting questions that listeners have left on YouTube, which reminds me, if you have some questions, please leave them in the comments. We look at all of our comments, and occasionally we'll select a couple questions as you put in order to review them on the show. And then in our final segment, we'll be looking at some bounce back candidates for NHL, younger NHLers or NHL rookies. We're going to look at some of the candidates that we've kind of highlighted for this episode, including Juraj Slafkovsky, Cole Sillinger, Anton Lundell, and Seth Jarvis. But before we get into any of that, just remember to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And again, leave a comment letting us know if you have any questions, anything you want us to talk about. We always review these comments and check these things out. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. I also want to take a moment to remind you that this episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Now, Bird Dogs offers a great selection of clothing. So go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL or enter promo code LockedOnNHL at checkout for a free water bottle with any order. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you that. So, Sebastian, head-to-head, Connor Bedard versus Logan Cooley. It's going to be a tough discussion, I think, up until the finish line of the season as to which one of those two will deserve the Calder Trophy. I think they're the two main candidates heading into next season. You could maybe put in Simon Edvinsson and perhaps
Luke Hughes, maybe?
Luke Hughes could be in that conversation. I'm also thinking about Olin Zellweger as a potential candidate if he makes the NHL.
Dark horse.
It's an interesting kind of batch of players, but I think that Bedard and Cooley are a pretty interesting head-to-head because they're both centers. Both are drafted very highly in the NHL draft and are heading into their rookie seasons with some interesting level of promise on teams that aren't necessarily built the best. So let's kind of review the two and see which one of the two would have the best shot of being an NHLer, an NHL Calder Trophy winner. So for me, Connor Bedard offers a very solid argument as the best talent is Connor Bedard to enter the NHL. It's just a matter of, does he manage to put up a point a game, and does he manage to do it on this Chicago Blackhawks team? I think that's the make or break for me. We'll start with Connor Bedard. Just what's your impression of what his point totals look like? What do you think is a realistic floor in terms of production, and is that enough for him to outproduce Logan Cooley?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm kind of curious to see what type of line he's playing on for most of the season. I think my current guess would be if he's centering a line with Taylor Hall and Lucas Reichel, which I think would be really fun, very speedy, lots of skill. Mm-hmm. And I think in that type of environment, you could see Connor Bedard putting up upwards of 70 points this season. But this is the Chicago Blackhawks that we're talking about. This is not a strong organization right now. A strong team, NHL team. They have a great prospect pool, and they're going to be a very, very good team for a long time, but they're not there yet. And it's always tough with rookie projections, right? Like we saw it with Slafkovsky last year, where some people were saying, yeah, this guy's going to put up like 50 plus points this year. And he scored 10 points in 39 games, right? Like it wasn't the biggest productive season. And we'll talk more about him later on in this episode, but it's always tough with the 18-year-old players playing on really, really bad teams. But Connor Bedard isn't just an average 18-year-old hockey player. He's a really special talent, and I think his shooting mechanics and skill and dynamism alone are going to get him upwards of 25 goals this year. And I think a lot will depend on the finishing abilities of the players he's playing with. But yeah, I think he's going to be very, very good this year. And I think if I had to make a guess, I'd say that he might play 70 games this year and put up like 65, 70 points or something along those lines with 25 to 30 goals. That'd be my current guess, but I hope he blows out of the water because it'd be very entertaining to watch this year. But
Yeah.
Chicago's a tough team to score points on.
Oh, for sure. Now, the question for that is, does that outrank Logan Cooley's ability to produce points and the situation that he's in? Because you look at Logan Cooley, and he's in a decent spot with Arizona Coyotes, who don't have that big, deep center depth. They don't have really anyone who can compete with Cooley, in terms of skill set on, down the line. But they also have Clayton Keller as a winger available to him, and if that becomes a long-term combination, we might be looking at an 80-point player this year in Cooley. He's got the skill set, he's got the abilities, he's got the hands, the vision, the creativity, and just the inventiveness to find teammates on the ice in any situation, in any position on the ice. And Clayton Keller's really good at getting open and getting shots off, but also has an incredible playmaking touch and soft hands, which I think would pair really, really well with Logan Cooley, who's got that dual threat scoring ability. He can shoot, but he can also pass. So if both of them combine together and regularly make passes to each other in open ice and regularly make those spin behind the back passes that they're able to do, I mean, you're looking at a dynamic 1-2 punch in Arizona. I don't think that's, outside of that, it's looking kind of rough. But it's just a matter of, is Connor Bedard more well-surrounded beside a Taylor Hall and their Lucas Reichel, or does Logan Cooley's, ability to pair up with Clayton Keller kind of rank that line? I'm still on the fence, and that's why we're having this discussion. But I feel like Connor Bedard is very difficult to get around in terms of a Calder Trophy winner, just based on raw ability. I mean, he outranks Logan Cooley as he stands in goal scoring, in playmaking, in vision, in dynamism. So for me, it's like skill-wise, it's not a question. It's just a matter of which one gets the most points. And we know that for the Calder Trophy, like, points are everything, right? So
of course. And I mean, look, Cooley's going to be playing with other very, very skilled young players too, like Matthias Michelli, who had a great breakout season last year and who is one of the most underrated playmakers in the league right now. So maybe playing with him could unlock some more goal scoring with Logan Cooley, right? On the other hand, you've got a guy like Dylan Guenther, who is a very, very good goal scorer and would also open up Cooley's playmaking game a little bit. Like, there are fits in there with other young players that are very skilled and very intelligent. So I'll be very curious to see how Logan Cooley does in Arizona, and I definitely think he's better surrounded than Connor Bedard is, at least as of right now. But I mean, it's Connor Bedard. I'm not going to bet against him for any Calder thing because he's probably going to win it in my eyes. I think he's the most skilled player that, as you said, that we've seen since McDavid came around. And I think that, look, McDavid didn't win the Calder, but I think this Connor will. And while I think Logan Cooley is going to be a really good rival for that trophy, and I do think that Logan Cooley is going to rise to the occasion of being a legitimate, like, top 6 level centerman this season. Connor Bedard is Connor Bedard, and I think Adam Fantilli might also be in that running in terms of breakout candidates because he's way better surrounded than either Bedard or Cooley are, right? Like, he'll be able to play with guys like Gaudreau and Laine, which will be exceptionally fun to watch. He's just, I'm not sure he's quite as refined as the two others are in terms of being able to produce at the NHL level, but he has a great toolkit. He's very, very physically capable, and that's going to help him his transition to the NHL. He has a tendency to play like pond hockey with the puck, where he's just doing everything he can with his skill, and he can sometimes get a little bit like tunnel visioned on making the skill play. And I think that might hold him back a little bit this season, which could be the difference between like him and Logan Cooley in terms of Calder Trophy votes.
I could see that. There's also the fact that for me, Fantilli he has this adaptability that I really like. He's able to mold this game and adapt very quickly. You know, once he realizes that the whole run around like a headless chicken and play pond hockey isn't working, I feel like it's not going to be very long before he adapts his game and modifies it. But we'll see how that goes. I still have Connor Bedard slightly edging out Logan Cooley for the Calder Trophy at the end of the day. But like we mentioned at the start of the episode, there's a lot of good candidates even on defense that could make that a bit of a difficult discussion. Speaking of which, we'll get into our mailbag questions, starting with a question about another one of these candidates. Before we get right into our second segment, Sebastian, talk us through our sponsor for today's episode.
Bird dogs make you look good. Bird dogs make stretchy khaki-style pants, whether they are shorts or long pants, that are designed to fit you slimmer through the thigh and leg to give you a truly sculpted look. Bird dog shorts are kind of a lot like Lululemons, but they offer you a lot more mobility. And I can say this right now because I'm wearing them at the moment, and they're really, really cozy. They also have this proprietary cloud knit fabric that wicks all the sweat away from your body to keep you cool, comfortable, and dry all day long. And again, I can concur. They are very, very comfortable to wear on hotter days, as today is. And they're very functional for any occasion, whether you're going out, if you're going to the pool, if you're just going out on a nice summertime walk, or if you're going to play some golf or some other types of sports. And bird dogs are extremely comfortable pants. So go to birddogs.com/lockedonnhl or enter promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free water bottle at checkout. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you.
All right, so moving on to our second segment, we're going to be looking at some questions from our listeners and viewers on YouTube. There are some very interesting questions that we wanted to highlight that we just didn't have time to answer, as a passing, and a thought that it would be much more interesting to keep those questions for the actual episodes themselves. So there are a couple of questions we highlighted here, starting with kind of going off the same vein as our first segment and kind of carrying off that subject. PL Lapointe on YouTube asks if Luke Hughes would be a decent Calder candidate. I think that's a pretty interesting discussion that we can have. It all depends on the point production. I don't think he's going to be outranking Dougie Hamilton in the power play quarterback kind of pecking order, but it'd be interesting if he ends up being a power play 2 quarterback and ends up on a top line with Hamilton. That'll be a pretty chaotic line, but I think it'd still be very, very interesting. For me, Luke Hughes, you look at his game in the vacuum, you're looking at a fantastic, fantastic skater, one of the most effortless skaters I've ever seen. His ability to change directions, to cut off his edge work and use his outside edges is fantastic. He can dig into the ice deep and kind of pivot really quickly, which is an ability that we're still looking at other, offensive defensemen to develop, like Lane Hudson and others like that. So, he's got some of these abilities down pat. For me, it's just the defensive ability isn't there. And I know that Calder Trophy projections often result in just a discussion on points, but I don't think that'll be enough to catapult him past Connor Bedard, Logan Cooley, and some of the other guys that are in that discussion. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Luke Hughes is going to have a very good season. The little bit that we saw at the end of last season and in the playoffs was really promising. And I think that it doesn't hurt that his brother is the best player on the team. And I think that kind of seeing how their chemistry builds this season is going to be really, really interesting to watch, because we saw in his very, very small NHL sample that he and Jack Hughes were really connecting consistently, and they were so dynamic when they were on the ice together. And I think that pairing is going to be a big factor if Luke Hughes is going to push for the Calder. But yeah, I think it's a very, very tough year to push for the Calder for any player that's not named Connor Bedard. And if you throw Logan Cooley and Adam Fantilli in the mix, you have a lot of extremely high-end skill there already. But Luke Hughes is a little bit older than those players, which gives him a little bit of an advantage in terms of development. And again, if he's able to really entrench himself on a top pairing on one of the better teams in the East, that is a very, very, very big thing. And I think that Calder voting really values the role a player plays, especially when they're on a high-end contending team, which New Jersey will hopefully be this year with their roster construction. So I think there's a chance that he gets like top 3 voting at the end of the day for the Calder. But I think there's a lot of hurdles for that. And as you noted, the defensive game will be a drawback. And it also is going to make it a little bit more complicated in terms of him getting those top pairing minutes, because Dougie Hamilton's also there, and defense isn't exactly his forte either. And if there were a right shot defenseman on that first pairing that were like incredibly good defensively, it would be maybe a bit of a different story in terms of getting those high-end minutes and enabling Luke Hughes to just go all-out offense, which is what he does best. But yeah, I'll be very curious to see. But as of right now, I still have my reservations on that front.
Fully understood there. I think we both agree on that. Another listener asks, what is the deepest NHL prospect pool? And I think we're both of the same mind that it's most likely the Montreal Canadiens prospect pool. You know, the Anaheim Ducks, the Anaheim Ducks have more depth of upside, if that makes sense. They have more high-end talent in terms of numbers than the Montreal Canadiens. But the Habs, for me, have the most likely NHLers in their pool, and it's going to create they've already got a very big logjam of contracts going on, and they're going to be running out very soon of contract slots for these prospects, and we're talking easily 10, maybe 15 potential NHLers in their pool. You look at guys like Joshua Roy, like Riley Kidney, that are a bit more on the lower end. They're not of the Reinbacher and Hudson and Slafkovsky conversation. They're more in that kind of second tier of miscellaneous guys. Roy, Kidney, Owen Beck, the list goes on and on and on. Sean Farrell as well. They've got so many kind of lower end NHL potential guys that, for me, they have the most depth in the NHL, just in the pure number of potential guys that could reach the NHL in even a fourth line capacity. They've got a lot of depth in multiple different positions, center, wing, even on defense on the left side. There's a lot of depth in their lineup, but they're still, I don't think, a proper star, a top-end star in the Habs lineup. And as much as I like Reinbacher, as much as I like Lane Hudson, I don't think that they're of the level of a guy like Adam Fantilli or Leo Carlson, or, you know, like there's a different level to these guys. And with a 5th overall pick, I expected the Habs to add that kind of player, especially with, you know, Matt Michkov just there. But it's still interesting to see just how much raw depth the Habs have. But moving forward to our next question here, Zayden.1995 asks, how is Alexander Holtz doing? Kind of what his projection is like, and how has he progressed in his game? It's a tough one. I haven't seen that much progression in Holtz's game, and it was mainly a concern for me because you looked at him in his draft here, and he was one of the best shots. He had one of the best shots I've ever seen in a prospect. Just a really heavy, really accurate release that he could release from anywhere. But my big concern with him from day one was, how does he use that? You know, that's, for me, it's we talk a lot about tools versus toolkit. Alexander Holtz is a perfect example of that. He has an insane tool in his goal scoring ability. But the toolkit surrounding it, I mean, he's not able to put things together in a way that is cohesive and conductive to NHL results. And that's what's holding him back right now, is that he's not able to get in positions to score as often. He's not able to move off the puck at a high-end level. He's not able to use his skating in order to separate from opponents. So his tools don't blend together. Essentially, he's not getting as many opportunities to showcase his fantastic shot, because the rest of his tools aren't up to par, and especially his ability to understand when and how to use his tools isn't up to par. And that's a big concern with Holtz, is he able to develop that? It's a very tough thing to develop, that sense for when to use your shot, when to use your skating to free up your shot or stuff like that. I'm still looking to see what progresses in that end. So I'm a bit hesitant to have that conversation right away. But I'd say I'm fairly concerned with Alexander Holtz and how he's progression. I don't see much that really shows as much promise, that shows much progression. But who knows? Maybe this year he just goes all out and proves me wrong. We'll see.
And along the same lines, we have a question here about Logan Mailloux's ceiling. And I think my answer is a bit similar in terms of that toolkit versus tools dichotomy, because Logan Mailloux has some excellent tools. He is an above-average skater. He's quite mobile. He has exceptional handling skill for a defenseman. He's quite big. I wouldn't say that he's necessarily the most physically effective defender, but he has that size as a baseline, and he has a wicked shot. and those four things are kind of the foundation of where his value as an on-ice prospect lies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the Habs drafted him in the first place, are for those facets. That said, I haven't seen his toolkit progress much at all since he was drafted. And that is a concern because he was drafted a couple of years ago now. It's been two full seasons, and he still has the exact same flaws that he had in his draft year, and I haven't seen significant progression on that front. Defensively, there's a lot of concerns in terms of his decision-making with when he decides to close his gaps, if he decides to close his gaps. He's often kind of all or nothing, where he's either going to be really passive or he's going to take a massive lunge to try to stop a play. And those two options are often neither of them are quite the strongest for most more complicated situations to deal with, which in the OHL he can get away with, but against pro competition, I'm a little bit concerned with how that projects. And furthermore, even offensively with his toolkit, with his excellent handling skill, with his mobility, with his desire to activate in the offensive zone and his hard shot, he still struggles to really attack empty space often. He struggles to use his own movement and the motion of defensive structures to kind of find holes and attack those holes. He has the tools to do it. He just he's not able to do it consistently. And
makes sense.
That's something that he's going to have to work on for quite a while still. And it's why I don't think that he's going to be an NHLer within the next 2 or 3 years, because there's a lot of gaps in of an effective NHL player that are still quite glaring holes in Mailloux's game. That said, there is a ceiling there with that tool, with those tools. I think the defensive game is never going to be a strength, but offensively, he has those individual tools to become a productive offensive defenseman. But he's going to have to be in the perfect situation. I think maybe playing with a guy like Caden Gooley could maybe bring out the most in him. But I'd be worried about him being exploited at 5-on-5 and second pairing minutes. And on a power play, I think he could be a decently effective second power play quarterback. I think that's where he might be at his most valuable in the NHL level. But I think at even strength, you're probably safest with him being in a third line role and being a bit of a power play specialist. That's kind of how I'm seeing him develop at the moment. But do you have a different take on that, Hadi?
Not at all. It's just I wanted to add that, the idea of Logan Mailloux not being ready for the next 2 or 3 years, I think that's true, but I don't think I think he's still going to be playing in the NHL within the next year.
I agree.
Mainly because the Habs just don't have anyone on the right side. They don't have anyone on the right side. And also, right now, the way I see it is I see David Reimacher being more NHL ready than Logan Mailloux by a decent margin. My God. But there's no way they're throwing. There's no way they're throwing Reinbacher into the mouth of the wolf right away, just like that. They're gonna
give Mailloux a slap last year.
But I think with Reinbacher, it's a different situation where they know that he doesn't have right away the upside to be a top pair or second pair defenseman. If he's playing in the NHL, he's mostly going to be playing in a third pair role. And for me, it's, do you prefer Mailloux in that role or do you prefer Reinbacher in that role? And I think the Habs will prefer Mailloux in that role based on what he brings. But if you look at both of them in a vacuum and look at their abilities and their projections, for me, by far, Reinbacher is the most NHL ready player. But time will tell with that.
I think his projection's better too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. But we'll see what happens with that. But what we'll do right now is we'll go to our third segment. We'll be talking about some NHL bounce back candidates, including Juraj Slafkovsky, Cole Sillinger, and Anton Lundell. All that's coming up on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects. All right, so to end things off, we'll be looking at 3 NHL bounce-back candidates, players who could have bounce-back seasons this year who didn't really play up to expectations last year. Either it was a sophomore slump or they had an underwhelming rookie season in one case here. We'll start with that case. It's Juraj Slafkovsky of the Montreal Canadiens. Slafkovsky, heading into the season, I already knew that it wasn't a good idea for him to play in the NHL. I was of the opinion that he should have spent the year in the AHL or even better, gone back to Finland to continue his progression over there. I think some consistency with where he was playing would have helped him a lot in terms of just getting familiar with the system and getting comfortable enough to start bringing out some more confident, more creative, more inventive plays. It's very rare that you're able to be as confident when you're changing teams when you're reaching a level where you're competing for a spot where you have to do all the right things, where the team is expecting you to, do all the right things defensively before you start getting inventive and creative, because otherwise you're going down, right? Like if there's that threat, you're a lot more likely to be passive than aggressive in your inventiveness and creativity, which is what we saw from Slafkovsky. A main issue with him a lot of the year was that he skated a lot with his head down, and you can do that in Finland with more open ice, with collapsing structures, with more of a chess-like structure to the game, where you don't have to worry about the chaotic element of getting hit out of nowhere. But in the NHL, he got caught with his head down a lot. It led to an injury, it led to some issues, and that cut his season short. And he ended up with 10 points in 39 games.
Yeah.
That's a concern, but I feel like this year Slafkovsky, especially with the work he's been putting in the offseason, with working with some of the top specialists in the world in terms of oxygen capacity and the ability to dig into your reserves and dig deep and play deeper shifts with a lot more energy. I feel like Slafkovsky is going to spend a lot more time with his head up because he won't be as winded and as exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
So that could help him a lot, and it'll also help him be able to reach 18 to 20 minutes a game without any concern or issue to his health or his longevity on the ice. So I think that he's in a decent position, especially with a Canadian team that isn't necessarily the deepest up front. They've traded a couple of pieces up front as well. There's going to be more openings for Slafkovsky to play in the top six. I'd say he plays most of the year on the third line, but I think that he's going to spend a couple, maybe 10, 15, 20 games on the top in the top six in a first or second line capacity. And that could help him a lot, because a long-term line of Slafkovsky, Suzuki, and Caulfield just makes you salivate. It's a fantastic combination of skill sets. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think that it's actually a really nice fit, but I do actually prefer the fit of Slafkovsky with Suzuki and Doc with Caulfield in terms of stylistic matchups. And I think the Habs are kind of still searching for that final cog to fit well with Suzuki and Slafkovsky on perhaps more of a two-way line, where Doc and Caulfield can be like pure offense. That said, I think Slafkovsky is going to play a lot of second line minutes this season, and I hope he does, because I think a big issue in his rookie season was the lack of pre-scanning on receptions, whether he was getting receiving a loose puck in open ice or getting a pass. He would very, very rarely pre-scan before getting a stick on that puck, which is, I think, a really big contribution to how often he got hit with his head down without knowing that contact was incoming. And I think that that's going to make a big difference, and also his confidence with the puck, because when you're not getting clocked every single time you have the puck, you're going to be more confident to try things and be a bit more calmer in possession, which I think is going to be a big thing for Slafkovsky. That said, I would still expect him to maybe max out at 50 points this year. Like I wouldn't say that have like sky high expectations here. I think like that 35 to 50 point range is kind of where it's going to fall this year. But I do think he's going to be significantly more consistent and more effective on the ice game to game this season.
For sure. Now, moving on to Cole Sillinger. For me, Sillinger is a decent candidate for a bounce-back season. Didn't really produce up to expectations in his sophomore season. It was a pretty difficult season, especially on the ice. I mean, the numbers kind of reflect what we saw on the ice from Sillinger. He was having trouble kind of connecting with his teammate and gelling with them and creating chemistry. But I feel that as Adam Fantilli works his way up into the top six and hopefully the top line, you'll see a Sillinger that's more sheltered, more reserved, and has a bit more room to work with, because he won't be in a situation where he's facing tough competition, where he's having to live up to the expectation of potentially being a top six center. I see Sillinger as, if he plays in the top six, it's going to be as a second line winger. But I don't see him as a second line center or first line center long term. That's just not his game. He's a great puck mover. He's a great distributor, and he's got a fantastic shot. His skating's always been kind of iffy to me. It's improved slightly over the last couple of years, but for me, Sillinger still strikes me as the type of guy who you're most likely going to see in a second line winger role. And if he's playing on the wing of an Anton Fantilli next year, that would be fantastic. But I think that long term, that first line will be Gaudreau, Fantilli, and Laine. And then from then on in, it's just who you get to play with Sillinger. And once you have a consistent kind of combination of line mates for Sillinger, I think that's going to bring out his game a lot, because he's the type of player who's really smart and adapts really well to the players that he plays with. But he needs consistency, he needs stability, which is not what he has right now in Columbus, and that's kind of what led to his results last year. And to end things off, just wanted to give a quick word on Anton Lundell, who went from, I think, 45 points in 60-something games the year before to last year putting up less points in more games. And I was kind of curious as to see kind of what happened with that. But it was mainly that I feel like Florida struggled a lot at the start of the year, and it took them a long time before they got into the playoff conversation. And for me, Anton Lundell was the type of player who, you know, it was difficult for him as the team was having difficult times, because he thrives on thriving lineups, and Lundell is extremely smart. He's extremely dependable. I feel like he took big steps in his defensive game, and that could have held this game back, because he was focusing on the defensive side of things to try to kind of plug the gaping hole defensively that was occurring in Florida. Their goaltenders were letting everything in, and I feel like Lundell was just trying to do everything to avoid that, and that kind of led to these results. But I feel like Lundell's going to have a bit more freedom to run his offensive game this year, and could have an opportunity to end up playing on a top line, which is not an opportunity he had often last year. And I'm excited to see an Anton Lundell on the top line, because for me, he's one of the most intelligent players I've ever seen. To pair him with a guy like Matthew Tkachuk would be a fantastic 1-2 punch offensively. I feel like they build off each other really well, because Tkachuk brings the intensity and effort level and grittiness that Lundell doesn't always bring, but Lundell has a finesse element to his game that I feel could really complement Matthew Tkachuk's game fairly well. But we'll see how that goes. But those are the three candidates for bounce back seasons among young NHLers that we wanted to highlight for today. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment. Like we said, we read those comments, and the good ones we leave for the episodes so we can discuss them. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about everything in the sporting world that's going on. And make sure to tune in for our next episode as we continue some head-to-heads and other discussions about NHL prospects. This has been Hadi Kalikesh with Sebastian and Hadi, and we hope you tune in next time.